People always assume marriages end because of one big mistake: an affair, a betrayal, a screaming match that goes too far. Mine didn't. My marriage ended because of 1,000 small decisions that were never really ours. When I met Emily, I thought I'd found the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. She was kind, intelligent, and had a way of making ordinary days feel special. We could spend an entire Saturday doing absolutely nothing and somehow end the day laughing. For the first few years, life was good. We both worked, rented a small apartment, and slowly built a life together. At least, that's what I thought we were doing. The first sign should have been obvious. Every major decision somehow involved her mother. At first, I didn't mind. Her parents were close to her. I respected that. When we bought furniture, her mother had opinions. When we planned vacations, her mother had opinions. When we discussed finances, her mother somehow had opinions about those too. Emily always laughed it off. That's just how Mom is. And honestly, I believed her. The problem was that over time, those opinions stopped being suggestions. They became decisions. I would discuss something with Emily and she'd agree. Then she'd visit her parents. The next day she'd return with a completely different position, every single time. One evening we were discussing buying a small house. Nothing fancy, just something affordable that we both liked. Emily loved it. We spent hours looking at photos and imagining where we'd put everything. Then she went to her parents' house for dinner. The next day she told me we shouldn't buy it. I remember staring at her. What changed? She hesitated, then said the words I would hear 100 times during our marriage. Mom thinks it's the wrong neighborhood. Not I think. Not I've changed my mind. Mom thinks. I let it go, because that's what I always did. A few months later, I was offered a position with another company. It wasn't a dream job, but it was a huge opportunity. Better pay, better growth. The only catch was that we'd need to move a few hours away. I wasn't asking for an answer immediately. I just wanted us to discuss it. At first, Emily seemed excited. We talked about the possibilities. New city, new house, a fresh start. Then she spent the weekend with her parents. When she came back, everything had changed. We shouldn't do it. I frowned. Why? She looked uncomfortable. Mom says I'd be leaving everyone behind. I laughed, not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emily, what do you think? She looked surprised by the question. Asking what I thought seemed to confuse her more than asking what her mother thought. That was the first time something inside me shifted. Not anger, not resentment, just disappointment. Because I started realizing something. I wasn't building a future with Emily. I was negotiating with a committee. The strange thing was that Emily never saw it. She genuinely believed she was keeping everyone happy. Her parents, her family, me. But every compromise somehow came from the same direction. And every sacrifice somehow came from mine. One Christmas, I suggested spending the holiday together. Just us. A quiet trip somewhere, nothing dramatic. Emily smiled. I'd love that. 3 days later, she changed her mind. Her mother wanted the whole family together. Again. I remember sitting in silence after she told me. Emily noticed. Why are you upset? I looked at her, then looked away, because I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. How do you tell someone that you're slowly disappearing from your own marriage? How do you explain that every decision feels like it already has an answer before the conversation even starts? So I simply said, it's fine. It wasn't. And deep down, I think both of us knew it. We just weren't ready to admit it yet. The hardest part wasn't Emily's mother. It was watching Emily slowly disappear behind her. Because the truth was, Emily wasn't trying to hurt me. She loved me. I never doubted that. What she couldn't understand was that love alone isn't enough to build a marriage. At some point, two people have to choose each other. And Emily never seemed able to do that. Every major decision followed the same pattern. We would discuss something, We would agree. Then she would speak to her mother, and somehow our decision would become her mother's decision. I tried reasoning. I tried patience. I tried compromise. For years I tried. Nothing changed. One evening we were discussing whether to start trying for children. We weren't arguing, just talking, the way married couples do. For once, I wanted to know what Emily actually wanted, not what her mother wanted, not what her family expected, her. So I asked, "What do you think?" Emily smiled. "I think it might be time." I remember feeling relieved. Then she paused and said the words I was already expecting. "Although Mom thinks we should wait another couple of years." Something inside me sank. Again. Always again. I looked at her for a long moment, then asked quietly, "Emily, what do you want?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" I laughed softly, not because it was funny, because I suddenly realized she genuinely didn't understand the question. "What do you want?" I repeated. "Not your mother, not your father, not your family, you." Silence. Emily looked away, then back at me, then away again. For the first time in our marriage, she couldn't answer. Not because she didn't have an answer, because she didn't know. And that frightened me more than anything else. After that conversation, I couldn't stop noticing it. Every choice, every opinion, every decision. There was always another voice in the room, and it wasn't mine. The worst part was seeing how much pressure Emily lived under. If she disagreed with her mother, she felt guilty. If she disappointed her family, she felt guilty. If she chose herself, she felt guilty. She was trapped. And the more trapped she became, the more I felt helpless. I loved her, but I couldn't save her from a prison she didn't realize she was living in. The final argument wasn't even a big one. No shouting, no broken plates, no dramatic scene. Just exhaustion. We were sitting at the kitchen table. Another discussion had somehow become another conversation about what her mother thought was best. I don't even remember what the topic was, only how tired I felt. Finally, I looked at her and asked, "Emily, if your mother told you tomorrow that we should divorce, what would happen?" The color drained from her face. "Mark." I held up my hand. "No. For once, answer honestly." She stared at me. I could see the panic in her eyes, the conflict, the pain, because she knew exactly what I was asking. And for the first time, she couldn't escape it. Minutes passed. Neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I don't know." Those 3 words broke my heart, because they told me everything. Not yes, not no. I don't know. The woman I loved couldn't tell me whether she would choose our marriage. Not because she didn't love me, because she didn't know how to choose anything for herself. I looked at her and felt something I never expected to feel. Not anger, not resentment. Pity. I pitied the woman I loved, and I hated myself for it. Because a husband should never have to beg to be chosen, and a wife should never have to live her life waiting for permission from everyone else. I reached across the table and took her hand. Emily immediately started crying. She already knew. Maybe she'd known for years. Maybe we both had. "I love you," I said quietly. That only made her cry harder. "Mark." I shook my head. "I know." And I did. I knew she loved me. That was never the problem. The problem was that love wasn't enough anymore. Not when there was no room for us to build a life of our own. Not when every decision belonged to someone else. I squeezed her hand one last time, then let go. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt completely alone. A month later, our divorce was finalized. And the day after that, I disappeared. The day after the divorce was finalized, I left. Not because I hated Emily. Not because I wanted revenge. I left because staying had become more painful than leaving. For 8 years, I had fought for a place in my own marriage. I didn't have the strength to keep fighting anymore. A few months later, I found a small mountain village tucked between forests and rivers, the kind of place people usually drove through without noticing. To me, it felt like peace. I rented a small cabin overlooking the river, worked remotely, spent my evenings hiking mountain trails and helping local community groups whenever they needed an extra hand. Life wasn't exciting, but for the first time in years, it was quiet. And quiet was exactly what I needed. The first year wasn't easy. I still thought about Emily, more than I wanted to admit. There were days I reached for my phone before remembering there was nobody left to call. Days when a song, a restaurant, or a random memory would bring everything rushing back. The marriage had ended. The love hadn't. That was the hardest part. Eventually, time did what time always does. It softened the sharp edges. The memories remained. The pain became manageable. Life slowly moved forward. Then, almost 2 years later, Ryan showed up, an old friend passing through the area. We spent most of the afternoon fishing beside the river, talking about work, life, mutual friends, everything except the one subject both of us were avoiding. Eventually, Ryan broke the silence. "Have you heard anything about Emily?" The question immediately tightened my chest. I shook my head. "No." Ryan stared at the water for a moment, then sighed. "She's not doing well." I looked away. Part of me wanted details. Part of me didn't. "What happened?" Ryan shrugged. "Lost her job." The words hit harder than I expected. Emily had always loved her work, always taken pride in it. Hearing that felt wrong. Ryan continued. "Moved back in with her parents." I remained silent. "Sarah's worried about her." Sarah, Emily's best friend. Probably the only person who still knew what was really going on. Ryan hesitated, then added quietly, "I don't think she ever got over the divorce." The river continued flowing between us. Neither of us spoke for a while. Eventually, Ryan stood up. Conversation moved on. Then he left. But his words stayed behind, long after he was gone. While I was rebuilding my life in the mountains, Emily was slowly losing hers. At first, she believed I would come back. Not immediately, but eventually. A phone call, a message, one final conversation. Something, anything. For months, she carried that hope. Every unknown number made her check her phone. Every notification made her pause. Every knock at the door made her look up. Then one day she realized something. I wasn't coming back. The hope died first. Everything else followed. Friends stopped hearing from her. Weekend plans disappeared. The woman who once filled every calendar with plans and goals suddenly had nothing she wanted to do. Work suffered. Not because she wasn't capable, because she stopped caring. Coworkers tried helping. Managers gave her chances. Friends reached out. Nothing worked. She wasn't angry. She wasn't rebellious. She was simply lost. Eventually, she lost her job. After that, she moved back into her parents' house, the same house she had spent most of her life trying to leave. Only now it felt smaller and lonelier. For the first time in years, her mother didn't have answers. Therapy, career counseling, support groups, new opportunities. Nothing helped. Because Emily wasn't trying to solve a problem. She was trying to understand one. How had she lost the man she loved? And why had she never been able to choose him? Months became years. Her mother watched helplessly as her daughter became quieter, more withdrawn, less certain of herself. The confidence that had once defined her slowly disappeared. And for the first time, advice wasn't enough. Nothing was. Then one evening, nearly 2 years after the divorce, something happened that nobody expected. Emily's father finally snapped. For years, Richard had stayed quiet. He avoided conflict, kept the peace, supported everyone. But watching his daughter slowly disappear finally became too much. Dinner sat untouched on the table. Emily stared at her plate. Her mother was once again suggesting another therapist, another plan, another solution. Finally, Richard stood. Enough. The room fell silent. Emily looked up. Her mother froze. Richard looked at his wife. For a long moment he said nothing, then quietly asked, "Do you know what you've done?" Tears immediately filled her eyes. "Richard." "No." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You spent years convincing yourself you were helping." His wife started crying, but he continued. "Every marriage needs boundaries. You never knew where yours ended." The words landed heavily in the room. Then his eyes moved toward Emily. "And she never learned where hers began." Silence. Painful silence. Richard looked exhausted, older than Emily had ever seen him. Then he turned toward his daughter. His voice softened. "Emily." She slowly looked up. "You need to find him." Fresh tears filled her eyes. "Dad, you need to make peace with him." The room became silent again. Not peace as husband and wife, not peace as a couple, just peace. The kind that allows someone to finally move forward. Richard took her hand. "I don't know what he'll say. I don't know if he'll want to see you." "That's not the point." Emily stared at him. "Then what is?" The question never left her lips, but her father understood anyway. "The point is that your life stopped the day he left." His voice broke. "And it shouldn't have." Tears rolled down Emily's face. Richard squeezed her hand gently. "You loved him. That won't change. You lost him. That won't change either." Then he leaned forward. "But you cannot spend the rest of your life living inside this pain." The room was completely silent. Even her mother had stopped crying. "Find him. Make peace with what happened. Then start living again." For the first time in 2 years, Emily made a decision entirely on her own. She would find me. Not to get me back. Not to save a marriage that no longer existed. But because she couldn't spend the rest of her life trapped in the past. And somewhere in the mountains, completely unaware of the decision she had just made, I sat on the porch of my cabin watching the river flow by. Wondering why, after all this time, I suddenly couldn't stop thinking about her. Before I left, I asked a few close friends for one favor. Just one. "Don't tell anyone where I am." Ryan looked at me. "Anyone?" I nodded. "Anyone. No exceptions, no conditions. I wasn't running away from a person. I was running away from a life. 8 years of arguments. 8 years of compromise. 8 years of feeling like a guest in my own marriage. I needed space. Space to think, space to breathe, space to become myself again." To their credit, my friends respected that. For nearly 2 years, they kept their promise. A few weeks after her father's conversation, Emily started looking for me. The problem was that nobody would tell her where I was. Not Sarah, not my old coworkers, not mutual friends. Nobody. Every conversation ended the same way. They either didn't know or refused to say. The strange thing was that Emily didn't get angry. 2 years earlier she might have. Now she simply accepted it. Because for the first time in her life, she understood something. Nobody owed her an answer, especially not me. Eventually she reached out to Ryan. She already knew he had seen me recently, which meant he almost certainly knew where I was. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. And ended exactly how she expected. "No." Ryan shook his head. "I can't." Emily nodded slowly. "Because you promised him." Ryan looked surprised, then nodded. "Yeah." Silence. No argument, no pressure, no tears. Just silence. Finally, Emily stood up. As she reached the door, she stopped, turned around, and asked one final question. "Is he okay?" Ryan smiled slightly, the first genuine smile of the conversation. Yeah. That single word stayed with her for weeks. Mark was okay, somewhere out there, living his life, breathing, moving forward. For the first time in 2 years, she knew that much. And strangely, it helped. 3 weeks later, she came back. Ryan wasn't expecting that. Most people would have given up. Emily didn't. She looked exhausted. But there was something else too. Something Ryan hadn't seen before. Determination. He sat across from her, already knowing why she was there. Before she could speak, he asked, "Why are you really looking for him?" Emily frowned. "I told you." "No." Ryan shook his head. "You told me you want to find him." "That's not the same thing." The room became quiet. Ryan folded his arms. "What happens if I tell you where he is?" Emily opened her mouth, then stopped, because she honestly didn't know. Ryan waited. Eventually she spoke. "Maybe he tells me to leave." Ryan remained silent. "Maybe he doesn't forgive me." Still nothing. "Maybe he doesn't even want to see me." The words hurt, but they felt true. Ryan watched her carefully, then asked, "So why do it?" For a long moment Emily couldn't answer. Then she looked down at her hands. "My life stopped when he left." The words barely came out. Ryan said nothing. Emily swallowed, trying to hold herself together. "If I don't face him," her voice broke, "I think it'll stay that way forever." The room fell silent. For the first time, Ryan understood. This wasn't about getting me back. It wasn't about fixing a marriage. It wasn't even about forgiveness. Emily was trying to move forward, trying to save herself. Ryan sat quietly for several moments, thinking. Then finally he spoke. "If I tell you where he is," Emily looked up, "you don't get to blame him for whatever happens next." She nodded immediately. "I know." "You don't get to pressure him." "I know." "And you don't get to expect anything." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "I know." Ryan studied her face, then slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out a pen, and wrote something on a napkin. Emily stared at it, almost afraid to breathe. Ryan slid it across the table. "Mountain Ridge Valley." Her heart nearly stopped. Ryan continued. "Small village called Pine Creek." For several seconds she couldn't move. After 2 years, I was no longer a memory. I was a place, a destination, a real person living somewhere in the world. And for the first time, she knew where. The journey took almost 2 days. Long highways, mountain roads, small towns she'd never heard of. Every mile giving her another chance to turn back. Every mile making it harder to do so. When she finally reached Pine Creek, she parked near the center of town and simply sat there. The village was beautiful, quiet, simple, nothing like the city, nothing like the life we had left behind. And for the first time she understood something. I hadn't come here to hide. I had come here to heal. The realization hurt more than she expected, because she finally understood how much pain I must have been carrying when I left. At that exact moment, I was helping repair a footbridge near the river, a project the town had been working on for weeks. By late afternoon, we finally finished. I said goodbye to the others and started walking back toward town, thinking about dinner, thinking about absolutely nothing important. Then I saw her, standing near the grocery store, holding a travel bag, looking completely out of place. At first I didn't recognize her. The woman looked thinner, older somehow. Not physically. Life had simply left its marks. Then she turned, and my entire world stopped. Emily. For a second I genuinely thought I was imagining things. 2 years. 2 years without seeing her. 2 years without hearing her voice. And suddenly she was standing 20 yards away, looking just as shocked as I felt. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The mountains disappeared. The village disappeared. Everything disappeared, except her. Finally, I walked closer. Emily looked like she had 1,000 things she wanted to say. Instead, she simply stood there, nervous, terrified, hopeful, all at once. I stopped a few feet away and asked the only question my brain could manage. "How did you find me?" A small laugh escaped her, half relief, half disbelief. Then tears appeared in her eyes. It took a while. For the first time in 2 years, I almost smiled. The first conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. Not because we solved anything, we didn't. Most of it was awkward. Two people trying to navigate 8 years of memories and 2 years of silence. We spoke about simple things: the village, the mountains, work. Anything except the subjects both of us were afraid to touch. Eventually, the sun began to set. Emily looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with travel. I stood. "You have somewhere to stay?" She nodded. "Small motel near the highway." I pointed toward the river. "Stay away from cabin 7. She frowned. "Why?" I smiled. "The roof leaks." For a second she laughed. A real laugh. The first one I'd heard from her in years. Then we walked back toward town. At the motel entrance she stopped. Neither of us knew how to end the conversation. Finally she smiled. "Thank you." I nodded, then walked away. The next morning I expected her to be gone. She wasn't. Then the day after that, still there. 3 days later I found her sitting beside the river reading a book. I stopped. "You're still here?" She looked up and smiled. "I leave tomorrow." I nodded. The next day she was still there. A week passed. Emily kept finding reasons to stay. At least that's what I thought. Later I learned that wasn't true. She simply wasn't in a hurry anymore. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't waking up with a weight on her chest. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't counting regrets. The village was quiet. The mountains were peaceful. And somehow, just being there felt enough. One afternoon, I found her sitting outside the bakery watching children run through the town square. "What are you doing?" She smiled. "Nothing." The answer surprised me. The old Emily always had plans, schedules, goals, lists. This Emily seemed content simply sitting there, watching life happen. After a few moments, she pointed across the street. "What about that building?" I looked over. "The school." Children's voices drifted from the playground. Emily watched them for a moment, then smiled. "I think I would have liked being a teacher." I looked at her. "Really?" She nodded. "I used to help my younger cousins with schoolwork." A small smile appeared. "I always enjoyed it." I don't remember her ever telling me that. Then again, maybe neither of us had been very good at listening back then. The next morning, Emily wandered into the school. At first, she was just curious, nothing more. The principal happened to be outside. A conversation started, then another, then another. The school was small, only a handful of classrooms, only a handful of teachers. One of them was retiring at the end of the month. Finding replacements wasn't easy, especially in a village like Pine Creek. The principal laughed halfway through the conversation. "We've been looking for help for months." Emily smiled politely. "Good luck." The principal laughed again. "At this point, I'll take all the luck I can get." Then the conversation moved on. Nothing important. At least that's what Emily thought. That night she sat alone in her motel room, looking out toward the mountains, thinking. For 2 years everyone had been asking the same question. What's next? She never had an answer. Not after the divorce. Not after losing her job. Not after moving back home. For 2 years she had been standing still. Now suddenly an answer appeared. Not a permanent answer, not a life plan, just a simple thought. Maybe I could stay a little longer. For the first time in years, that felt enough. 3 days later, she signed a temporary teaching contract. I found out completely by accident. We were walking beside the river one evening when she casually mentioned it. I took a job. I stopped walking. What? She smiled. Temporary position. At the school. For several seconds I simply stared at her. Not because she stayed, because she chose. Nobody had convinced her. Nobody had advised her. Nobody had approved it. She had simply decided. On her own. For the first time since I'd known her. And somehow that shocked me more than seeing her in the village. The weeks passed. Then months. Emily became part of the village. The children adored her. The parents trusted her. The other teachers loved having her around. For the first time since arriving, she looked happy. Not completely healed. Not completely free from the past. But happy. And slowly, without either of us talking about it, we became part of each other's lives again. Evening walks. Coffee by the river. Conversations that lasted longer than either of us intended. The pressure was gone. The expectations were gone. For the first time, we were simply two people spending time together. One evening we were sitting on our usual bench beside the river. The sun was beginning to disappear behind the mountains. The water moved quietly beside us. Neither of us had spoken for several minutes. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It had become familiar, comfortable. Emily watched the river, then glanced at me. "Can I ask you something?" I smiled. "You usually do." She rolled her eyes. "Why aren't you dating anyone?" I looked at her, then toward the river. "Who says I'm not?" A small smile appeared on my face. Emily froze. For a moment, she thought she had misheard me. "What?" I chuckled. I said, "Who says I'm not?" Emily forced a laugh. "Oh." That was all she managed. "Oh." I looked back at the river, completely unaware of what had just happened inside her chest. Or at least pretending to be. Emily stared at the water, suddenly unable to look at me. For months she had been telling herself she expected nothing. For months she had repeated that she came to the village for herself. For months she had accepted that we might never be together again. Yet hearing that single sentence hurt far more than she expected, because it made something real. Someone else could be sitting beside me. Someone else could be making me laugh. Someone else could become part of the life I had rebuilt. And she would have no right to object. None. After all, she was the one who lost me. A few moments passed. Then she finally asked, trying very hard to sound casual. "So," she cleared her throat, "is she nice?" I looked at her. The corner of my mouth twitched. "Very." Emily nodded. "Good." Another pause. "What does she do?" I smiled. "She's a teacher." Emily's heart dropped. A teacher. The village school. The same place she worked. She quickly started mentally going through every woman she knew. Then I added, "She's stubborn." Emily frowned. I continued. "She moved across the country for reasons she still struggles to explain." Emily slowly turned toward me. My smile grew. "And she keeps asking questions that are none of her business." For the first time she realized I was talking about her. Her eyes widened. I laughed. The first genuine laugh she'd heard from me in years. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Neither of us needed to. Because we both understood what I had just said. And for the first time since arriving in the village, Emily felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. Maybe the future wasn't closed. Maybe the story wasn't over. Maybe some things deserved a second chance. And as I looked at the woman sitting beside me, I found myself hoping for exactly the same thing. Sometimes love doesn't end because two people stop caring. Sometimes it ends because they stop growing together. And sometimes, if they're lucky, life gives them a chance to meet again. Not as the people they were, but as the people they were always meant to become. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Forge Stories. And let me know in the comments, Do you believe some people deserve a second chance, or are some mistakes impossible to come back from? Until next time, take care.